Hey everybody, in this episode we're going to learn how we can aggregate a bunch of data together to do a total crypto portfolio value. This is going to be pretty interesting because we're going to learn how to deal with nested objects and aggregating data across those objects. So we're going to get some experience with map and reduce. Right now, here's how we have it. We can add a cryptocurrency in here and put some number. So 500 Ethereum will be worth that much. And then if we add another one in here, if we had, let's say 100 Bitcoin, it'd be worth this much. What I want to do is take these values and add them up at the bottom. It sounds pretty simple, like, oh, this plus that, but these are components. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how to move their state to their parent. So that way the values are managed by this entire page instead of just a single cryptocurrency. So let's first take a look at this state here, where this is stored and how we can move this value to the parent, and how to deal with not a number. This is a pretty easy fix. All we have to do is create a condition to say, hey, if this is not a number, don't display this, instead display something like 0. So let's jump over in our code, and I'm aware we have some stale code that's commented out, and we'll try to clean this up as we go. But if you've been following along, don't worry about that, and if you're just jumping in, also don't worry about that. So let's just go into the crypto summary, and this is the component that describes each one of these sections. So if we select one of these, this is the crypto summary component, and we can render it multiple times for different cryptocurrencies. There is a state here that is defined as the amount, and this is what is being typed in right here. Now, I set this to type string, and I've had this massive internal debate. The question is, should you parse the data immediately and store it as a number, or should you store it as a string and then parse it whenever you want to use it as a number? Hopefully that makes sense. But right now the way we're doing it is we are storing it right away immediately as a string, and then anytime we want to do some math operation on it, we will parse it to a number. And I thought that was the way I wanted to do it in the previous episode. But since then, I've changed my mind because I'm indecisive here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to store the value as a number, because throughout this video, we're going to be doing a lot of more operations, and I don't want to have to deal with parsing and all that stuff. So let's go to this state, and we will change this type to a number, and we will default it to 0, not as a string. This is going to break everything. So let's get rid of parsed float anywhere we see it. And here as well. Now this is where we will do the parse. This is the input. So e.target.value is coming in as a string, and we will say parse float and pass it in like that. Now some people will also use number, so passing it to the number constructor, which should also work, but I'm just going to go with parse float here. And then same here, we should already have it stored as a float, so we no longer need to do parse there. And then last thing, I accidentally just screwed up the parentheses there, so there we go. Everything should be working. Let's save, and let's just check to make sure things are working the way we expect. We should be able to type in values in here and get some value down here. So everything should be the same, but now we have less typing when we want to deal with this amount value. Now this amount is tied to this single component, so how do we actually push that up to the parent? Well, anytime you want to do that, you're going to actually want to pass down a function from the parent, which in our case is app, and then take that in as a prop inside of this component. This will allow us to invoke that function whenever we need to make a change. So where are we going to make that change? It's going to be right here. So this would be set the parent's state. Now I'm actually still going to keep this set amount just because it's pretty simple to work with, and our parent state is going to be an array of nested objects, which is super complicated. So we'll just keep the amount and the set amount here in this component and use them. So basically what we need to do now is we need to set the parent state by calling a function passed in as a prop. Okay, so what is that function going to be? Well, we will define that right here. Whatever function we are expecting, we need to set it as one of these properties. So let's just say it's called update owned. So this is going to change the amount that you own. And the way you say this is a function is by defining the structure of it like so, where the parentheses contain the parameters and after the arrow has the return. Now I know ahead of time this is going to be a void function because it's just going to update the state. It's not going to return a value, and then we can pass data to it. So if we're passing data to the parent, we'll probably need to know which cryptocurrency we're talking about and then how many we currently own. So I will have two parameters here. The first being the cryptocurrency that we're working with, and that's of type crypto. And then the second thing being the amount and this is going to be of type number. So far so good. And then what we will do is we will just retrieve this value with destructuring. So we'll say update owned, and this can be invoked down here. So we'll say update owned and pass in the crypto that we are working with and the amount that we're going to change in the state, which is going to come from e.target.value. And we will also need to parse it here. So we will say parse float and pass in e.target.value. So we've talked a lot about how this is going to be used in the child component. To summarize our change, we just took in an additional function and passed those values back to the parent. Now inside of the parent, we can create a function to update the state. So where are we going to define this? I'm just going to define it right before our return. So I'll have it right here. And we'll say function update owned, and then we will define this to match that structure. So we're going to have the crypto parameter, and this is of type crypto. And then we will also have the amount, which is going to be of type number. So this signature here should match exactly this signature defined here. Now we don't actually have the return type defined here. You can if you wish just by saying void, but this is optional. And if you decide to not include this, the return will be inferred by whatever's coded inside of these curly braces. So right now, if we kept the void there and we said something like return 5, it's going to complain and say type number is not assignable to type void. So if you know it's going to be void, you can leave that in there and you'll be sure not to screw it up. Now that we have this function defined, we can pass it to the child component. So down where we are mapping through the selected cryptocurrencies and rendering the crypto summary, we can include another property, which is update owned, and pass in that function update owned. And we're not going to have parentheses here. We don't want to invoke it. We're just passing that function to be invoked later. Now we're not getting any problems because these props that are passed in match the crypto summary app props defined right here. Before we included the update owned, it was giving us an error. Now I did want to share one thing, and that is, let's say this update owned was optional. This is totally theoretical here. It's not actually our case. But let's say we wanted to be able to not pass that in if we wanted. Right now it's complaining, but whenever you have an optional property, you can go into the defined types for those props and you can put a question mark before that colon and it'll say, hey, this is optional. You will need to do some conditional rendering down here. So basically saying if update owned exists, then we can invoke it. So you might need to turn this into a ternary by saying update owned question mark, then invoke it. Otherwise, null. So that is how you would modify this code if you had an optional property. Now, it doesn't really make sense in our case to have the optional property, but I just wanted to show that to you guys for completeness sake. So let's go ahead and put that back to how it was. So we are guaranteed to have an update owned, or it's not going to compile. So we can enforce that without the question mark there. And now we will just pass it like we originally were. So we are back to where we were now. The last thing I want to do is just add a console log to our function to make sure everything is wired up, and then we will build upon that. So let's just console log update owned, and we will console log the crypto that's passed in and the amount that is passed in. So this can make sure we're getting the correct values that we will then use to update the overall selected cryptocurrencies state. So let's take a look at the site and we will open up the console and let's just get a clean start. We'll clear that out, refresh the page. Let's choose an option such as Ethereum and say we have 10 Ethereum. Here is our console log from update owned. A little misspelling there, no problem. And this is the object that we have. And then the amount of Ethereum we own is 10. Great job. If you were able to get that wired up, consider this a checkpoint. Now we have to figure out how we can keep track of that owned amount and aggregate all of the owned amounts across all the different cryptocurrencies to get a total portfolio value. So we need to add it to state somehow. Now there's plenty of ways to do this, I'm sure. You could create state, and this will keep track of which cryptocurrencies and their amount, and then you can go through that to add everything up. Or an alternative option would actually be to add a property to that cryptocurrency object, which keeps track of how much is owned. That's what I'm going to go with, but if you want to go a different route or you think something might be easier, definitely give it a shot and maybe drop your suggestions or how you did it in the comment section below. But pretty much what I want to do is add a property to this cryptocurrency called owned, and that's going to be a number with the value 10. So what will that make our state look like? Well, you could see it if you just print out the entire selected state. So console.log selected. And let's run this again real quick. We'll add a cryptocurrency and we'll just set an amount 50. You can see this is our array, and we'll have each individual object in here where the property owned can be added up across all of them to be displayed on the page. So there will be some nesting and it's kind of complicated, but I'd like to keep everything in the same spot. So let's define that value on the type. So if you head over to types, here's where we defined our crypto type. And we can add a new property that we care about here, which is owned, and this is going to be of type number. Now, if you did decide of going the route of storing it as a string, you will want to make this a string variable, but it just makes sense to be a number for me, so that's what I went with. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to take this array and get a temporary copy, grab the object I'm looking for by its ID that matches the ID of whatever value we're selecting, and we'll update it to contain the amount owned, and then assign back the temporary array to replace the existing state. So it sounds complicated as crap, probably because it is, but let's just go ahead and try to do it. So what we'll do is inside of this function, we will first just clear this up. I'm not going to keep that. I'm going to create a temporary variable, which is going to be a copy of the existing selected array. When we then assign this new array to state, it'll be seen as a new object and will re-render the page. Now inside of this array, we will try to find the specific object we're looking for. So you'll say temp.find. This is going to take a function, and this function will have a parameter which is going to be each of the cryptocurrencies inside of this array. So I'll just call that C. And what we'll do is, instead of using curly braces here, we'll just do a comparison directly and say c.id is equal to crypto.id, where this crypto variable is the parameter that was passed in right here. So basically, if the argument crypto that was passed into this parameter here, ID is equal to an ID inside of the state array, we're going to return the state array object C. And that can be assigned to a variable as well. So we'll say let temp object be temp.find. And now we can modify this temp object by saying temp obj dot owned and assigning it a value of the actual amount that we now own, which is also passed in as an argument. Now we do get an error. The left-hand side of an assignment expression may not be an optional property access. So you get rid of that, for example, but then you get another error, object is possibly undefined. So the solution to this is to actually do an if statement. If temp object exists, then we will assign a value to it. So it'll look like this. That's going to change the object in that array, which we can then assign back to the original state. We can say set selected, passing in our new and improved updated array. And I want to track this progress, so what we'll do is we will create a use effect that is dependent on the state. So it'll look like this with a dependency array of selected. It's the only thing we care about for this. And inside of here, let's just console log selected and comma selected, so we can see the entire selected state. So let's give it a try. We will choose a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, put in a number such as 10, and you can see our selected state here. We'll have one object inside it, and inside that object we now have this owned value of 10. So far so good. Let's try adding another cryptocurrency, and we'll have, let's say, 500 of these. And taking a look at this now, we have our new updated state selected, and the second one will also have the owned 500, and the original one has owned 10. So far so good. Now we just have to go down to the bottom of our HTML page, aggregate that data, and display a total value. So inside of our code, we will scroll down to the bottom of our return right before this fragment, and that is where we are going to display this. And what we will do is we will say if selected exists, we will do selected.map, passing in a function. Otherwise, we will return null here. And let's test this out. So each one of these we'll call S, and we will return, let's just say, a paragraph for each of these. And let's put in here S dot current price multiplied by S dot owned, and that should give us the value for each of the cryptocurrencies we own, just to show that we can now include S dot owned in our math. So let's just go through an example from the beginning. So we'll say Bitcoin, we have 10 of these, and it includes our value down here as well. And if we have Ethereum, let's say we have 10 of these, and you can see we're now displaying 2 of these. So how can we go through and add up all of these values in this map? Well, it's an additional function called reduce. So to do this, instead of returning a paragraph, we're just going to return the value, and we're not going to need the curly braces anymore since we're not inside of HTML. After the map function right here, we can say dot reduce, and this is going to take a function as well, and you can also include a second argument, which will be the starting value. So we'll say 0. So this is going to have 2 parameters. It'll have a previous value and a current value. In each iteration, it's going to add up some value and return it. In the next iteration, that'll be assigned to previous. So all we have to do is say return previous plus current, save. Let's take a look, and it should give us a total. So 190,900 plus 13,000 is roughly 204,000. So let's look over that one more time. We have the current price multiplied by how many you own. This is going to then be passed into reduce, which will iterate through all of the different cryptocurrencies, adding them up and returning that value. If you want to see this in action, what you could do is you could console.log previous, current. And I know we got a bunch of console logs going on here, so let's just say prev current inside of quotes so we can really easily find that in the console. And let's restart here and clear out the console. So we'll choose a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin. Say we have 10 of those, and then we'll add another cryptocurrency, Ethereum. And before I change this value, let's just clear the console one more time because it's going to show the whole process in the display. Let's say we have 10 of those. So the first iteration, previous has a value 0, and current has 191,000, which is our Bitcoin value. The next iteration, that value moves to previous, 191,000, and the next value is our Ethereum value, 13,451. If we had a third one in here, it would combine these values, and that would be the next previous value. So if you want to see that, we could add a third one in here, such as Tether, clear this out, and we will say we have 10 of those as well. That third iteration is the combination of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then Tether. Last thing I want to talk about in this video is dealing with not a number, which does show up quite frequently when you're working with this application. So for example, if I removed these, well, this is not a number, and that's not a number, which is just really bad. So what we can do is we can change the way first this component is displaying the value of the tether, and then we will worry about everything combined. So let's go over to the crypto summary and find where that's being displayed. We have it displayed down here. We can just do a quick condition. So here we can surround everything in a ternary. So I'll put the curly braces and say if it's not a number, which you can do that with a function call. If it's not a number, passing in the amount, then we will return just a string saying 0. Otherwise, we will return a string starting with the $, followed by the rest of this, which we can remove that set of curly braces now actually, and then include a plus sign here. So that should fix the first one. Give that a quick save. And now if we don't put in a value here, we get 0. It still doesn't fix this problem down here where the aggregation is not a number. And this has to do with the internal value, the amount is still not a number. And we are trying to aggregate that with other numbers, so we're getting not a number. And that's going to be defined inside of app, where we are doing this map. We are multiplying the amount owned by the current price, which if the amount owned is not a number, this multiplication is going to give us not a number, which we can then not aggregate and add up in the reduce. So what we can do is actually just create a little condition and say if it's not a number, ignore it, or just return 0. So we will go in here and say if is not a number s.owned, we will then return 0. Otherwise, we will return the multiplication of owned and current price. Let's check it out now, and we leave this empty and we still get a total value. Now all we need to do is just format this value, and we can do it the same way we formatted each one of these. So let's go ahead and try that out. Once we are finally done with all these function calls, we can say dot to locale string, passing in undefined for the locale, or is it locale? I'm not too sure. And then for this, we can pass in the minimum fraction digits being 2, and the maximum fraction digits being 2 as well. So that should format it a little bit. And we got the commas. Now I just need to prefix it with a $sign. So we will just have a $sign right here and add that value to it. There we go. It's beautiful. Now you can just add a pretty message. Your portfolio is worth, and display that there. That's all I got in this episode. We got the portfolio value. Now what we could do if we wanted is we could create a pie chart, splitting that up based on the total values for each one of those cryptocurrencies. I think that'd be a cool addition to this app. Maybe we'll do that in the next episode. See you then. Be sure to subscribe, and peace out.